Hi, it's been a while since I've done one of these videos and I'm getting back into the flow of things. So thank you for watching. This has been quite an intense year for me. Lots of beautiful, magical things and lots of deep emotions and um, dark nights. Lots of growth, lots of transformation, and um, some existential crisis mixed in with everything. So, yeah. It's a bit weird to be talking again because I'm still forming what this whole channel is about. And I started this just with kind of off the cuff reflections on life, on my journey, and just kind of try to figure out what I was really wanting to say. And now I think I'm getting a clearer idea of what that is, but there's also some resistance there because I don't feel quite ready for that. But I think the general idea here of just being in flow and just speaking from my heart and seeing what comes up is still applicable. So I'm just going to do that and we'll see what happens. um, I've been reading JedMckenna a lot more lately. It's not the first time that I've read him. I first came across him like maybe 4 or 5 years ago. But starting the end of last year, I started rereading his third book, Spiritual Warfare. And then I read it again this year, and then I read it again, and now I'm reading it a third time this year, a fourth time um, altogether. And it's been hitting me in new ways that I'm seeing reflected more and more in my reality. So, for those who don't know, Jed McKenna writes about spiritual enlightenment, and he does it in a very, I think, unique way. His third book, though, is less about enlightenment per se, and it's more about what he calls awakening within the dream instead of awakening from it. Um, he also calls this human adulthood, where you haven't really reached your full potential as a human being until you've crossed a certain threshold. And until you've crossed that threshold, in his mind, you're still a human child, no matter what physical age you are. So there's sort of this idea that there's a psychological maturity component to it, but that's only just the surface layer. It's much more about the key thing about human adulthood is surrender to life, and it's letting go of the need for control. And then it is trusting in the universe to show you what's indicated, to show you what needs to be done when it needs to be done, to show you direction, and to also recognize that the universe is also a mirror. So it's intelligent and alive, and it also reflects us because we're not separate from it, because we're all one thing essentially. And that is more what it means to be a human adult. And he says Crossing the threshold is just about surrender. It's about letting go of the need for control and going with the flow. But that can deepen sort of indefinitely. It can continue to expand. And the way I take it is that our relationship with the universe continues to expand and deepen. That we can become even more and more intimate with it, even more playful with it, can manifest things to a greater degree. We can become more skillful in life. So that continues to grow and flower. But the initial break from childhood to adulthood is just about surrender. And for most people, that surrender can be very challenging, because by the time we reach an age where we might start to even think about this kind of stuff, and most of us don't. A lot of us might have lives that are deeply embedded with a web of different things, like a social circle, our family, our kids, maybe our parents, work and career, finances, religion or spirituality, institutions, education, whatever. Like, all of these things can sort of anchor us into a particular way of living. And oftentimes what surrender means is having to let a lot of that go, and in some cases even let all of it go, because all of those things we accrued not authentically, but because we thought we were supposed to. And it's only when we give that up that we can actually start to look at what is authentic for us. This is something I've been thinking a lot about for myself, because I've questioned, is this something that I've actually done fully, or is it something that I still need to do? And the way Jed talks about it, he says it's a single event. It's a threshold that you either cross or you don't. It's not something that progressively happens, and it's not something that you have to do over and over. It's just a single event in a person's life. It's a rite of passage. So, just in thinking about if I've actually passed this line or not, it occurred to me that I did back in 2012, when I had just parted ways with my boyfriend at the time, who had a major impact on me, who more than anyone else I'd known really got me to think more for myself, and really got me to question the status quo. I think before I met him, I liked to think that I was an independent thinker, but compared to after I met him, I really wasn't. I questioned some things, and I was a misfit and an oddball, so just by default you kind of see things a bit differently from most people. But in a lot of ways I still was kind of anchored to the status quo. And the way I was building my life at that time was growing more into that, trying to be a successful person. I was in Toastmasters. I was studying business at the time, and was doing a marketing internship. So it was just like I was building my life around this normative idea of success, and I was really looking forward to having social approval for that. And I was still in a lot of ways tied to the person who raised me, who had a very boxed in view of life. So it was a huge deal for me to meet my boyfriend at the time and to fall in love with him and to um, get him to shake my world up and to really start questioning things on a deeper level, more deeply than I ever had before at that time. So that was really, I think, what initiated what Jed refers to as a death and rebirth process. That was, I think, the beginning of it, just questioning the status quo more. And looking back on it, I really think that my partner at the time, Preston, was someone who had crossed that line, but just was afraid to go further. But I think he had crossed this death and rebirth transition. I think he saw things very differently from most people. And I think because of his struggles, partly because of his struggles and partly because he saw things people couldn't see, I think a lot of people just didn't take him seriously. But most people could still sense that there was something kind of special about him. He had this sort of energy and charisma. So he was sort of like an initiator for me. And when we parted ways, it was extremely difficult for me. It really felt like half of my soul had been ripped out, and it was physically painful for me. And I went from living with him to moving in with a couple friends who I see now at the time were very much stuck in the mode of, like I was talking about before, this status quo ideal of success. That's what they were really committed to. We had some good times that were, quirky and unique. We did some ghost hunting together. But really, what their goal, their focus was really just to kind of buckle down and achieve the American dream, So, and I don't know if people would really say that, but that's really what it comes down to for most of us. And yeah, I moved in with them and lived there for a few months, 6 months, I think. And it was pretty clear, at least halfway in, if not sooner, that we were going in different directions and we weren't on the same page. And I ruffled some feathers. I obviously still had some issues, and I was grieving the loss of my partner. I was having a hard time with that separation. And I went into a pretty deep depression, and I did start drinking more. I wouldn't say I was an alcoholic at that point. I was just trying to cope with this depression. And I also was doing art, and I had the great fortune to also have a friend who was very similar to me, who also I think was going through this death and rebirth process too at the same time. That was actually really cool. We were both kind of going through it. And synchronistically, she also had like a lot of the same issues with her partner, and they were going through wasn't quite a clean full breakup, but it was back and forth kind of situation. So there were so many parallels between us, and she was living in LA at the time and I was living in Reno, but we would talk on the phone for hours, like several times throughout the week. And I think that was one of the biggest things that helped me get through that and not lose my mind or not stay stuck in depression. and it was very affirming. But I did reach a point where I felt like I was stagnating and I couldn't stay there. My goal, even prior to this, my goal was to move to Portland, but I didn't have a clear plan. I was getting back into manifestation at this time, so I had like a picture of Portland that I looked at every day, and I was watching Portlandia a lot. I think I was just getting into the vibration of connecting with Portland and aligning with that. Yeah, and I was doing rituals to expand my sense of self and grow, and things like that. And I was also part of this magical community at the time. But yeah, I reached a breaking point, and my roommates told me that I would have to leave. I think they gave me about a month or 2 months, and they said, like, yeah, this is it. You have to go. I did have a couple of friends that I could have stayed with, like just couch surfing, but I saw the life that I could have had if I would have stayed in Reno, like sleeping on someone's couch for a while and then finding like a dead end job, and or just like a really just crappy job somewhere, and then just sucking it up, and then maybe eventually figuring things out. But it something in me just knew that like that wasn't right for me, and I didn't start feeling like a sense of really true renewal and energy and inspiration until I decided that I'm going to take this as a sign that this is my time to move to Portland. And I have no idea how I'm going to do that. I don't know what that's going to look like, but this is what's going to happen. And I just decided that. And I took that as my sign from the universe. And interestingly enough, once that came to clear recognition, everything lined up. I don't think I had any money at this point, and I just started selling stuff on Craigslist, made some money that way. A friend gave me $80, and I just posted ads on Craigslist. Found a guy who was gonna drive through Reno at the perfect time with a pickup truck to offer me a ride to Portland. Eventually I found someone who was gonna offer me a place to stay, but then he backed out at the last minute, literally the day before I was supposed to leave. But this other guy I had been talking to on like a dating app or something, or a dating website, last minute offered me a place to stay, and I took him up on the offer, and I'm glad I did, because he ended up being a really amazing person. And his friend, his roommate, housemate, also ended up being an amazing person, and they were just good people. So it was like the perfect scenario as my intro to Portland. And it wasn't just an intro to Portland. I was also in some ways still going through my coming out process as a gay man, and both of them happened to be gay and really well connected to the gay community. And I just remember us going out every night, and they would buy me drinks and take me to gay bars, the first gay bars I'd ever been to, and they connected me to a gay men's intentional community where I found housing, and it just ended up being just the perfect scenario, just lining me up. And so yeah, I trusted, and then everything just fell into place, and it worked. And The only time I started having challenges, I think, is when um, I think when I just slipped back into fear and I tried to um, control things too much, or I just coming from a fearful mindset, the ways I would act towards people if I was afraid, the ways I was approaching myself, my life, if I was just fearful. Usually those would be the times that things would start to um, get more difficult. But when I just kind of let that go and I just trusted, it all really just worked out and it just flowed really easily, really smoothly. Um, and I ended up, let's see, yeah, I ended up, when things didn't work out at the intentional community and I couldn't afford to stay there anymore, I ended up moving in with a friend, stayed there for a month. That didn't work out. Ended up moving in with another friend who I had just, I had met him in a kind of holistic meetup group, and he came into my life at the perfect time. Was the perfect person, and he totally embodied surrender. He was in a wheelchair and had gone through he had been through his own death and rebirth process where he was really forced to surrender, and he really embodied it, and he exuded this sense of just trust in life, trust in people. He just radiated love, unconditional love, and just a beautiful human being. And he just came into my life at the perfect time, and he offered me a job to be his caregiver, and yeah, it was perfect. And so I started working for him, and then ended up getting hired at the agency that was also working with him for his other caregiver. Ended up getting hired by them for a more full-time position, and so I was working with him, working at this agency, and just things flowed and worked out just really easily. And yeah, eventually I stayed with him for a month before I found my own apartment, my first apartment, which was perfect. It was in the exact place that I wanted to be. It was just down the street from the local university, which I ended up going to, and it was just perfect. It happened really easily. It was the perfect price. Yeah. And things worked out really well generally for like another year and a half about, and then yeah, I think I just slipped back into that fear. I felt like I was stuck. I felt like things weren't working out, and I was coming up with ideas of how to change it, and really wanted a car, and thought, well, if I get a car, I can just do Uber and quit my job. By this time, I had just started working at a group home too, so it was yeah, I was just feeling like something needed to change, but instead of trusting the universe and asking for a sign and then acting on that, I tried to take matters into my own hands. I bought a car when I really shouldn't have, when I didn't really have the money for it. And although it ended up being the perfect car, it ended up being the exact car I was looking for. So that was a funny synchronicity. It was the first car that I saw on the lot, the one that was offered to me, that the guy took me to, and it was, yeah, the exact kind of car I was looking for. But it was not quite in alignment at that time, because I was struggling financially, and I soon realized that I did not like to do Uber, and I had a lot of anxiety and had a hard time multitasking, talking to people and then driving, and then I would miss like exits and take the wrong turns a lot, and it just wasn't really the best thing for me. It wasn't quite in alignment. It wasn't quite the right timing, and there were some other things that happened too that just like my finances just weren't at their best, and then school fell through. I wasn't able to continue with that, and then wasn't able to get more loans. So just it was kind of this spiral that I got sucked into, and I think ultimately is because I just wasn't. I just dropped out of alignment, and coming from that place of feeling like I'm starting to lose everything, I eventually lost my apartment. I didn't get evicted, but I moved out at the right time. Moved back into the intentional community, but didn't really want to. Like I kind of had to, and so that was a hard transition for me. But I was still determined to come out stronger and on top from all of that. A motto I've always tried to keep to myself is to honor for myself is to come back better and stronger after each challenge. So whatever life throws at me, however I get knocked down, my intention is always to come back better, to rise to an even higher level than I was before I got knocked down. And generally, I'd say in life, it's kind of worked out like that. Not quite perfectly, but overall, for the most part, it's kind of worked out like that. And so I set my intentions on I want to manifest the exact kind of job I want. I wrote down the criteria, what I was looking for, the pay, how I want to feel, what I want to do, everything. My dream job for that time. And I manifested it. It came pretty quickly. It was a marketing apprenticeship that was more startup, and so we got to be very heavily involved with the founder. It wasn't like the hierarchy wasn't quite as strict. It was more like we're just a close-knit team, and the pay was the highest pay I've ever had from a job. Yeah, it was everything that I asked for, point by point. So I got that, and then was able to move out, but slipped back into fear when it came to moving. I had some friends who were really trying to convince me. The friends I actually lived with in Reno, who moved out to Portland after I moved out here, they had planned it too, but anyways, they wanted me to move back in with them and wanted us all to get a house together, to rent one. And I really wasn't feeling it. I was like, I don't really know about this, guys. But they kept coming to me and just really, really trying to convince me to do this, because they were trying to save money and they wanted a roommate that they could trust. And I kept saying no, and eventually I finally caved. Thought we would find a place that was more something we could all get excited about, but I quickly realized that they were still coming from a lack mindset and a fear-based mindset, and so they were more about like, we have to compromise, we have to do this and this, we can't look at all this other stuff, like, you know, it's just more fear-based. And I wasn't excited at all about the place that we found. I was like, it's kind of cool, but I don't like the neighborhood. I don't like the room that I'm gonna have. Like, this doesn't really feel right. But by this point, I'd already told them that I was gonna do it, so I just sucked it up and did it. And there are good things that came out of it. I'm trying to change my mindset around mistakes, that there really are no true mistakes, because everything leads us where we're supposed to go in the end. But looking back on it, I still would have done it differently. I would have said no and just waited for a place that actually excited me and that felt aligned with me. Um, so I got my dream job, but I also moved into a place that didn't resonate with me. And progressively, with my roommates also recognizing that we weren't quite in full alignment either, and that led to some issues. So I got kind of both at once, and eventually things did fall apart with the job. It turned into something different from what I had expected at first, and which didn't take away from how amazing it was in the beginning, and I don't regret it. It did teach me a lot, and I had a lot of great experiences with it, but it took a pretty sharp turn, and it didn't feel quite as in alignment. And I chose to resign, and went into a pretty deep depression. Was already going through a depression before I resigned, but the depression just kind of became heavier after that. And then I made some compromises to, like, I sold my iPad, and I gave my car to my roommates to just make up for rent until I could figure something out. And I did start my own marketing business, and that actually took off really quick. Like, I got 4 clients within a month. So that was pretty remarkable. And and they came in serendipitous ways, just like out of nowhere. Like, I wasn't really actively looking for them. They just like came to me, like 4 in 1 month. And so that was really cool. And it did give me a bit of money to get by, but I wasn't charging enough. It was my first time actually doing my own business and paying and getting paid for it. So, I mean, I felt, I wasn't super confident, and I didn't charge a lot. So I was just I wasn't making enough to really flourish. It was just like extra. It was, it wasn't enough. But it was remarkable how it all happened. And I also was offered a partnership deal to help start a company, a CBD coffee company, with someone who had the business expertise and the funding to do it, because he already owned a few different businesses and was also part of a venture capital firm. So it was kind of the perfect scenario for that. So these opportunities did come my way, but I did get scared, and I also brought in a couple friends who I thought could help me out with this, and we could all be business partners together. And unfortunately, they both were coming from a fear-based mindset, and we were not fully aligned, and it just wasn't a smart move from my standpoint. I did it from an insecure, fear-based place, and it just kind of amplified that. And so all of that just fell apart, and I just became demotivated to do that business. And then went from that to another opportunity showed up just out of nowhere for peer support, working in mental health. And the training came at the exact right time that I needed it. I went through the training, was like 2 months, got certified, and then it was still several months later before I found a job doing that kind of work, but I found it, and it was working in a mental health crisis center, just ended up really aligning, and everything flowed, and it worked out. And I worked at that place for 3 years. Things did take a turn there eventually. I got a new supervisor. Felt like the work culture kind of shifted a bit. Some of my coworkers left. When I started there, it was an excellent team, and I bonded really closely with quite a few people there, like not just as coworkers, but as friends. Like we ended up forming pretty deep connections. And I don't think I'd ever experienced that level of depth with coworkers before. So that was a whole new experience for me. And this was with multiple people, probably at least, I bonded with a lot of people there, 10 or more people, and then maybe 5 like core people. But eventually, yeah, I some challenges happened, and I became really triggered by some things, and then COVID hit, and that just made everything worse in a sense. And then I eventually resigned. But when I resigned, I was also working on becoming an independent contractor with Medicaid. And shortly after I resigned, I went to an ayahuasca retreat with my dad. Yeah, towards the end of this stint of working at the crisis center, I reunited with my long lost father, and that initiated some things, some big things. And then we ended up going to an ayahuasca retreat right after I quit, like a week after, I think. And then it was just a day after that Medicaid called me, approving me to be an independent contractor, and they were paying really well. Like this was the highest I'd ever been paid ever, like up to $172 an hour. Not even kidding. And all I really needed was one client, and it just was kind of unreal just how it happened. And so it was super, yeah, it just flowed, it just worked out, it aligned. There was no push, or there were some things I had to figure out, but I mean, all things considered, like it was pretty easy for the most part. And so I did that for a year. Yeah, I did that for a year and a half. So doing independent contract work. And I wasn't working a whole lot, but I was getting paid enough to pay all my bills and live fairly well, I stuck to a pretty, fair budget. I wouldn't say I was going crazy with money, but I was paying really cheap rent. But yeah, I was kind of just living really well, working just a handful of hours a week, and it was easy. Yeah, so, and I ended up getting some money, some like COVID relief money that ended up paying for a retreat that I went to that same year, which I think was pivotal for me in some ways. And yeah, I mean, I kind of look at that time of my life as like a mini retirement, because I worked so little hours that it just felt just like I was hardly working at all. It just was, yeah, it was kind of unbelievable. And I think a lot of what I was doing during that time was kind of recovering from burnout from my previous job, and just playing video games, going on walks, getting high, hooking up. Yeah, that was pretty much my life, and maybe I needed it. Yeah. So that was a year and a half, and then I did try to start an organization, a nonprofit, to help other peer support specialists do the same thing I was doing, and it didn't work out. We had some issues with it, and then it ended up being kind of a blessing in disguise because, about a year or so later, the state came down on it and decided that they didn't want us to do that anymore. So it was kind of a good thing that we didn't move forward with a nonprofit. But yeah, I kind of always have to have some kind of project in my life, even if it falls through, like something to like focus on. But that happened, and then I lost my client, and had to find another job. And at first I had a lot of anxiety about it, especially going back into the field, like in the system. But that ended up being easy too. Like, a friend who was working at an agency recommended it. I just happened to find them on my job search and applied, and they reached out. It all worked out, and I got the job, and it ended up being, I realized after the fact, kind of the perfect job for me to transition back into like the mainstream workforce, because it gave me the flexibility that I needed. It wasn't too stressful, like compared to the crisis center. It was like a lot less stressful, and it was kind of the perfect job to come back to. So yeah, that's a lot of stuff that I just shared. But this kind of comes back to this way of living is really about trust versus fear. Either you trust in life and you allow things to happen, or you stay stuck in fear, which leads to feeling like you need to control everything. And usually that kind of approach, it doesn't work very well, and if you can get it to work, then it leaves you feeling very drained and unhealthy. But an approach of having trust and surrendering seems to have a lot more ease, and the universe responds a lot better to it. The universe just brings you opportunities out of nowhere. You don't have to try as hard. You don't have to force things. You just let things come to you. You let things happen. And when you do take action, it feels inspired, it feels aligned, it feels right. It doesn't feel like something that you have to force yourself to do, usually. And yeah, I mean, it seems simplistic to say it like that, but that's really the big difference, and it is a big difference. It's a huge difference. Those are two totally different ways of living. And the more you live from fear, I think, the more you have to numb yourself to it, the more you have to distract yourself, the more you have to sink into video games and TV or gossip or alcohol or drugs or whatever you can find to make yourself feel better, because you're living in a constant state of background fear. It doesn't mean that all the time you're in a fight or flight state necessarily, but fear is running you in the background. And to sustain that, you have to numb yourself on some kind of level. You have to distract yourself. So it really sucks the juice out of life, and you can get comfortable there. You can make yourself comfortable there. And I've been in that state where I was comfortable. And it's fine, I guess, if you're fine with it. Most people live in that kind of state. Most people, what they do is they find a way to make the fear-based state more and more comfortable. That's it. Most people never fully leave the fear-based state. They just try to find more padding, more decorations for it. They just try to make it more and more tolerable, more comfortable. So usually the highest aspiration people have is to be as comfortable as possible. And it doesn't matter if you're someone poor or you're someone wealthy and ambitious. It still kind of comes down to that. But it's a totally different approach to life to come from a place of trust and surrender, where you're in relationship with reality. You're letting the universe respond to you. You're being open to opportunities, open to surprise. You're dancing, conversing with reality. You're not seeing yourself as separate from it. And you're just more in flow. But what can happen is that even after you pass through that transition, you can still get sucked back into fear. And when that happens, it's like you kind of shut down and you find ways to numb yourself. And I think what I'm realizing is, for someone who's already passed through the transition, through the death rebirth phase of surrender, to slip back into fear there's way more sensitivity to that than someone who hasn't transitioned yet. And I think that can either help the person to reorient and come back into trust more quickly, or if the person clamps down, then I think it'll cause them to try to numb it faster. Which, it can lead to addictive behaviors. It can lead to closing yourself off, or can lead to relying on other people for affection. I just think the response to that can be pretty strong. So because it takes a trust-based person who slips back into fear, it takes more willful ignorance to maintain that fear-based state versus someone who's just used to it. And to maintain that willful ignorance requires a lot more energy. And to keep that going requires a really good strategy for numbing yourself. But if you just let that go and just slip back into trust and surrender, then things just fall back into alignment. And I'm realizing that I've done that so many times throughout my life. I've slipped back into fear, and I think my intuition or my instincts would always just lead me back into trust some way or another, whether through psychedelics or books or videos or just something, some kind of message. It's like my instincts would somehow still lead me back to that place of trust again. And sometimes it would take me longer than others to get back there, but something would still pull me back in the right direction, and then I'd come back into alignment and flow again, and opportunities would present themselves, and things would just work out. So yeah, I am finding myself currently in a place where I have fallen out of alignment, but the blessing here is that I've become a lot quicker and more aware of this process and when it happens, whereas before, like I said, it was more intuitive, instinctual. I wasn't consciously aware of what was going on, but now I understand the process better and I know what's happening, and so I'm aware that I fell out of alignment. I think I have a sense for how it happened, and which is also part of the pain that part of why I feel out of alignment is also because there was a deep pain that came from recognizing that I went against my alignment. And it's like a pain on top of pain. The pain that led me to coming out of alignment, and then the pain on top of that of recognizing how I got out of alignment. So yeah, it's weird to talk about it like that, because then why can't I just see that and then just be like, okay, why add pain? Why add more pain to what is already there? Why not just let it go? And I am trying to do that. I'm getting there. I'm getting there. I'm trying to be patient with myself too. I'm trying to recognize that it's a process. If I try to push it away, that does not work. I've tried that before too. It just makes it persist. So I'm trying to process my way through it, but not force it to go away. But I am getting a little bit lighter each day, I think. And yeah, I'm just gonna try not to rush it. Yeah, and there's a paradox, it seems, of that there doesn't seem to be really such thing as a mistake. Because when I was reviewing my life, I can see that all the things that I thought were mistakes, or at least key moments where I fell out of alignment, overall they still led to opportunities that were more in alignment in some way. So in the ultimate sense, it still led to greater expansion. But at the same time, I also feel that it makes life easier to stay in alignment, stay in flow, and not slip back into the fear. So that is my intention, to increase my ability to recognize this alignment process and to stay in it, and to be more vigilant about fear, to not let it control me, to deepen into trust. So that's where I'm at right now. It feels very strange too, because I felt like I was jumping into a different reality, and feels like I took some steps backwards. I'm not quite sure what to say from this point, so I think I'll end it here. Yeah, I think I'll end it here. Thanks for listening.